So now this is the next part. This is why I don't like using Loctite, why I use the rubberized CA instead. Rubberized CA dries nice and quickly. So now these cups are always a little bit tricky to get in the boom. So what I do, I take my sanding block and I just spin a chamfer onto each of the bearing cups. I'm going to go ahead and get the macro camera out of the way so I can actually work on this. That one's a little tighter than I'd like it. I also forgot that while these normally come chamfered relatively a little bit into the hole, I usually take an X-Acto and just come around and make sure that there's no burrs going into either end of the boom. Also make sure there's no shavings left inside of the boom when you're done with that. And these I like to actually now sand so that they fit through just a very slight amount of pressure. The reason I like that is I don't want these cups to end up getting jammed inside of the tube as I'm pressing it through and being able to run cockeyed. If you have them so that they're just barely snug fitting in there, the run out on them will automatically straighten them out inside of the boom. It's still a little tighter than I like. Then go on to the next one. What this helps also is that if you have to replace the front conical gear, you can reset the rear mesh after having driven the conical gear on without too much problem from the actual front side of the boom instead of from the back side. Okay, so now the shaft can go either way pretty easily. Well, not super easily, but with just a little bit of resistance. So now I'm going to pull that out, make sure all the bearings stayed in their positions, and they all run free. And now is a good time to add a little bit of oil to each of the bearings. The glue is cured enough that the oil isn't going to attack them. And basically, by doing it from this side, we've already sealed the outer section of the inner race of the bearing so that oil isn't getting in between the inner race and the shaft. So the only place for it to go is in through the shield. The reason why I saved this to last after all the sanding is so that I don't end up with a bunch of plastic bits getting stuck into the bearings as well. I'm going to spin them all at once and make sure they all accept the lube. Push it in there, stand it on end, and just spin the shaft. Okay. So now here in that tail assembly section, talking about how there was one bearing in that set that was 3mm. Now's the time that you're going to actually use it. You're going to take the rear bearing, and this is the gear that goes in the tail box. There's going to be another one of these gears that goes on the tail shaft in just a little bit, or tail output shaft. So But for right now, we're just going to start with that one. Usually I pull out the shaft while I'm working on this one. Put the bearing onto the back end of the tail shaft. And I usually, lately, have started adding a wee bit of Loctite inside of the hole of the gear. And you can take any screwdriver typically, and just spread that around a little bit in there. Now, tail shaft, and I usually do this onto a paper towel. They say go ahead and use a block of wood, basically anything that will keep the gear from getting marred up. And just start by pressing it, and here's a circumstance where you either can use a clamp or just gently wrap it into place with a hammer, which is what I usually do. I usually just take a hammer and tap on the end of the tail shaft. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into the tail boom assembly so that the shaft is held straighter while I'm gently wrapping it on. Normally a harder surface than this table would be better because this table deflects a lot. So I'm going to actually wrap this on the rest of the way off camera. Onto the floor. That doesn't give. Hopefully you can see that there's a little bit of black sticking out there. That's the end of the tail shaft. And don't worry about it if it sticks out a little bit. I'm actually going to come back and sand the face of that gear just a little bit. But only once I'm ready to assemble everything. So the next step is to press that bearing onto the gear to lock it in place. Basically the bearing clamps, or that segment of the gear diameter is oversized so that when the bearing is pressed onto it, it actually helps to hold it in place. What I use for doing that is this little GWS pinion puller. Pull it out, press that on there. This is a LAheli Ricco tailbox spacer. I keep a spare one of those. And that will allow us to press the bearing onto the gear quite easily, usually. So now you can see that there's none of the shoulder visible. That's where we want it. When all done right, we should be able to press that in there. And see that it runs close to true. That bearing itself is going to help to capture it as well.